Happy Wednesday, everyone. I hope you're doing good today. You're here for another session of Sustainable in the City with Patrick King of Urban Green Lab and my co-hostess with the mostest, Jen Harmon of Metro Public Works.
I'm gonna start sharing my screen here so we can get you our little logistics information, our little title slide while we wait here. We'll give everybody a few minutes to hop in. We've got a lot of folks that are signed up for today, so we'll give everybody just a chance to pop in, get themselves comfortable, make sure you have a snack, get some water, and settle in for a really exciting presentation today. I am super excited about this one. Excited. I just did what I do when I type. I changed my ing to an ed and vice versa.
So okay. Jen, why are you so excited? Why is that?
Why am I excited? Exciting about this? I will say my undergraduate degree was in interior design. So I have always been fascinated with how design makes an impact on our daily lives and how we can design better. So I'm just really super excited to hear about, when I was in school, we were talking about LEED, and this just goes, which is leadership in energy and environmental design, and this goes way beyond that. So I just have a very particular interest in this presentation. So I'm very excited.
Excellent. And for those of you who just love the series and just joined on without realizing what the topic was today, we are going to be talking about living buildings and sustainable architecture. So should be a very fun, real fun, content heavy presentation because, chances are we're all in a building right now, right? Look at that. So yes, we're going to be getting started very shortly. Grab a cup of water, grab a afternoon tea, grab a snack, or if you're like me, grab your lunch. And I'm going to be eating a beet salad for lunch.
Ooh. Very nice. It's also a beautiful day today. So for those of you that are joining us by sitting outside, I am personally jealous. I have my window walled up to try and block the light out specifically for this presentation. So enjoy that natural sunlight, get outside today. It's a beautiful day. I'm looking forward to taking a bike ride when I get home. Oh, it's gonna be nice.
Sitting on the front porch, if you have one, with a cup of something cold to drink. You can do whatever you like. And before we get started, some usual things to know. If you have any questions or anything like that, we are going to do a Q&A after the presentation. You can go ahead and submit those questions throughout the presentation in the chat, and we'll just get to them once we get to the presentation, the end of the presentation. If you haven't already done so, please visit urbangreenlab.org and Metro Nashville Zero Waste on Facebook to learn more about our program. And if you want to keep up with everything, you want to really check out all the previous sessions, we do have a YouTube channel. Just go to Urban Green Lab on YouTube and you can find all of our videos there. And we are going to follow up today's session, as with every session, with an email that includes any links mentioned, that YouTube channel link, and a recording of today's presentation. So if you have to pop off for whatever reason, totally fine. Understand that it's the middle of the workday. You can, in your leisure time, just watch the recording. So all the ways to enjoy the program. And at that time, Jen, is 12:04. Do you think we're good to go?
I think we're good to go. I think we've got a good critical mass of our folks today. Oh, I got a real quick question. I'm going to answer it. Julia, the YouTube recordings will be available as long as Urban Green Lab has their YouTube channel. So
forever? Yeah.
In theory, forever. So there's no time limit on that. We want you to share them. We want you to watch them and go back and see anything that you missed as well. Share them with your friends, your family, your neighbors, your enemies, everybody. We want to see and share in all of this. So, all right. And with that, we are going to go ahead and get started. I'm really excited I'm going to pull this down now. I'm really excited to have a great group of panelists today here with us to talk about living buildings. Patrick gave a little intro to them, and I'm going to turn it over to them, but I'm going to let you know who we have here with us today. So we have a whole group. We've got Manuel Zeitlin from Manuel Zeitlin Architects. He's the architect and founder. We have Brad Province, also from Manuel Zeitlin Architects, who's an architect and co-owner. We have Laura Schroeder, a senior associate at Hawkins Partners, Inc. We've got Kim Shinn, who is principal at TLC Engineering Solutions. And we also have Alan Sparkman, who is the executive director at the Tennessee Concrete Association. So all of these folks today are going to be talking to you about living buildings. We are going to split this presentation up just for your reference into kind of 2 sections. So what's going to happen is we are going to talk about living buildings, let you understand all that goes into what that means, what that is. And then we're going to hop into a specific example about the Tennessee Concrete Association building here in Nashville. So in between those, there's going to be an opportunity for some questions a little bit earlier on in the presentation. So if you have questions about living buildings as we're talking, please put those in the chat, because we'll probably have a nice spot a little bit earlier to break into some Q&A so you understand everything about living buildings before we start talking about Tennessee Concrete Association. And with that, I am going to turn it over to our fabulous guest today. And I think, Brad, you're going to start us off. Is that correct?
I think Manuel is.
Oh, go ahead.
Okay, thanks, Patrick and Jen. I thought I'd give a little background real quickly. A couple years ago, Alan Sparkman and I were talking, and Alan, he wanted to get together and tell me about an idea he had to design a new building for the Tennessee Concrete Association, and he was thinking about it being a living building. And it's like we do with many things, I responded, man, that's awesome. That's really exciting. What's a living building? And so we thought we took the next couple of years to start finding that out. And a few months later, Alan called and said he wanted to grab coffee, and he goes, maybe we'll just do this as a lead project. It may be a little hard to do it as a living building. And I was like, man, come on, you've got to do a living building. It's like such a rare opportunity to have a client like you that's really informed and into it, a nonprofit that has the ability to maybe do it, and a team that could help pull it off. So Alan was willing to, basically take a leap of faith and pursue moving forward with a living building. So then we immediately put together a team, and it went without saying that Kim Shinn was going to be part of it. He's really, we look at him as sort of Nashville's guru on sustainability. And then Laura Schroeder with Hawkins Partners, we've worked a lot on just the idea of doing really sustainable landscapes and integrating landscape with architecture, and getting both of them involved really early on in the process was key. I think in any design, it's important that involve an entire team of consultants from the beginning, not bring them after the fact. But in a sustainable building design, a living building, it's even more important. So then I turned to Brad in our office and I said, how would you like to work in a living building? And Brad responded, man, that'd be awesome. What's a living building? So anyway, this has been a great exploration of what a living building is and how we hope to do one. And we're going to share that with you today. So now I'm ready to turn it over to Brad to take you through a presentation.
Awesome. Thank you, Manuel. Real quick, I'd like to outline our agenda for today. We're going to talk about the current condition of our planet and the building industry. We're going to introduce you to the International Living Future Institute, ILFI, and its sustainable certification frameworks, focusing primarily on the Living Building Challenge, LBC. We'll show you several examples of sustainable and LBC projects, then introduce Alan Sparkman and the Tennessee Concrete Association, and finally talk through our process and education that we've garnered from working on our LBC project. Next slide, please. With that, I'd like to start by posing a question. What do you find most challenging about sustainable design? Please keep this in mind. We'd love to hear from you at the end of the presentation. Kim, Manuel, Laura, Alan, would any of you like to give a real quick brief answer here?
There are no great projects without great owners. One of the biggest challenges that we see in pushing the envelope and making projects net zero water, net zero energy, net zero waste is we just can't get the owners to go along with us. And as an industry, we're trained to do what the owners ask us to do. And that's what has made this project especially gratifying and to this point successful, is we have an owner who's committed to doing those things.
Great answer. Next slide, I have some global stats to share with everybody about the building construction industry. Our industry uses 31% of the world's natural resources. The industry consumes 40% of all energy produced, uses 12% of the world's potable water, and is responsible for 39% of the greenhouse gas emissions. That's quite alarming. The past decade has seen relatively small progress in terms of addressing global climate change. We are reaching a point where the next decade will see a change to our ecosystem health, fresh water supplies, and climates. The world population is currently 7 billion and climbing. Every single ecological system is in decline, and that rate of decline is increasing. Global temperatures are also increasing, which creates a shift in rainfall distribution, acidifies oceans, and could lead to a potentially catastrophic rise in sea level. So the moral imperative here as practitioners is to play an active role in better. Next slide, please. I have a visual aid for everybody. The US alone produces 165 million tons of construction and demo waste per year. If we were to dump this year's building waste on top of Seattle, it would look like this. Next slide. And if we include all materials required to manufacture all building products, it would look like this. Also quite alarming. So what can we do? Next slide. Enter the International Living Future Institute. So what is ILFI? It was founded in 2009 as a nonprofit organization that seeks to counter climate change by pushing for an urban environment free of fossil fuels. It works to build an ecologically minded, restorative world for all people and uses principles of social and environmental justice. It is the umbrella for a whole host of programs, initiatives, and resources. Next slide, please. Some of these initiatives are listed here. The top row, you see the flower, that is Living Building Challenge. That is their flagship framework. The butterfly is the Living Product Challenge, which urges manufacturers to do better. The cluster of flowers is the Living Community Challenge, which addresses larger scales such as communities and urban design. And then the green circle is core green building certification, and we'll get to that a little later. The bottom row is another series of initiatives that the ILFI promotes, and it's their transparency labels. So there's a program called JUST for organizations and businesses. There's declare labels for all products, and then there's reveal labels for buildings, which basically discloses the building stats, energy usage, water consumption, those kinds of things. Next slide, please. Another question to pose to everybody. What if every single act of design and construction made the world a better place? Simple question with a super broad reach. Next slide, please. So I think this graph helps to explain the difference between being less bad and truly regenerative. On the left side of the graph, you see the negative orange curve. That curve is improved by certain initiatives and programs such as energy code minimums and green and high performance buildings and certifications. And those would be programs such as Energy Star and LEED. So you can see we're getting closer to zero, but we're still in that negative impact zone. LBC comes in right at zero, and that's their goal, is to always create a positive impact on the environment. So I think this is a pretty powerful slide in terms of LBC as a whole. Next slide, please. So what is LBC? It's a 7-petal framework, and within each of those petals, or across all of those petals, there are 20 imperatives. And this framework addresses new buildings, interiors, existing buildings, landscapes, and infrastructure. The important thing to note about this slide is the existing building category. Focusing on existing building stock is very important. Do we always need to build new? Sustainable retrofits are critical. And I have a few stats to share regarding retrofits. In the Empire State Building, for example, all heating and cooling systems were recently replaced, and its 6,500 windows were upgraded. This led to a 40% reduction in energy usage, $4.4 million in annual savings, and 7,700 tons of greenhouse gas emissions saved each year. That's huge. At the Willis Tower in Chicago, a retrofit brought energy usage down by 70%. Also huge. Next slide, please. So this is the imperative matrix for LBC. On the left side of the matrix, in the first column, you see all 7 petals listed. The second column, you see all 20 imperatives listed. Now, the important thing to note here are the little icons next to some of the imperatives. The green circle represents the 10 core imperatives that you need to meet to become core certified, and IFI has identified these as the most important imperatives of the entire framework. The orange square icon addresses scale jumping, which I'll let Kim talk about in a few seconds. And then it may be hard to see, but there on the right side of the imperatives, there's a little handprint, and that addresses handprinting, which I'll also let Kim speak to. So a couple things to note about this matrix. Obviously, you need to meet all 20 imperatives to become fully LBC certified, but there's an alternate certification path called petal certification. And within that framework, you need to meet the requirements of 3 petals, one of which must be energy, water, or materials. Now, if you wanted to target energy, water, and materials, that would be awesome. Those are the hardest petals to achieve, and that would be a super ambitious and positive certification for your project. The other thing to note here is that scale jumping and handprinting creates a lot of flexibility into the framework. And I'll let Kim speak to that, as well as the differences between LBC and LEED.
Thank you, Brad. Scale jumping is an opportunity for you to use resources and take advantage of resources that are not on your site. So, for instance, if you were trying to get a group of homes as a single living building challenge project, and knowing that net zero water and net zero energy are imperatives for the living building challenge, scale jumping, instead of putting a water treatment plant and a set of solar electric panels on every home, you could actually sort of treat it as a campus and put a single PV array that then would share its energy among all of the homes. And then by the same token, on the water treatment side, bring the sewage from all the homes to a single treatment point, rather than trying to treat the gray water and black water on each home site. So that's scale jumping, the ability to jump off of your particular building site and to use resources that are shared among other living building challenge projects. Hand printing is a play on the word footprint. So one of the things that we talk about a lot in sustainability is, what is your footprint? What impact do you leave on the environment by your footprint? In hand printing, what we're doing is allowing a project to once again share off of its site and to fund or provide ecosystem services off-site that would then allow some other project to decrease their impact by that much. And in the Living Building Challenge, the two hand printing opportunities are in the water pedal. And specifically what this allows you to do is to say, rather than being restricted to being net zero water only on your site, if you're not able to do that because of site constraints, you might actually fund another project somewhere else to reduce its water impact by the amount that you weren't able to do on your site. So it's a little bit of an ecosystems accounting exercise. With respect to LEED, there's some real fundamental differences, and Brad pointed out a big one is a lot of what LEED is about is doing less bad, looking at what standard building and construction practices are, things that are code minimums, and doing things that lower that building's environmental impact. But what Living Building Challenge does is say, we don't just lower the impact, we provide beneficial eco services to the environment as a part of our building. And that's kind of the story behind the symbol of the Living Building Challenge being a flower. A flower actually doesn't extract anything from the environment. It gives back to the environment. It gives a source for food to the animals that live around. It, through photosynthesis, actually takes carbon dioxide and turns it into oxygen and water. It is implied and explicit that it is part and a contributor to that ecosystem. And that's what Living Building Challenge buildings seek to do. They take no more water than falls on the site. They use no more energy than the sunshine that falls on the site. And they produce no more waste than what it takes to build the building. So it truly is a regenerative rather than just a less bad. The other big difference between LEED and Living Building Challenge is this idea that under LEED, there are many different things that you can take credit for in improving your environmental performance, but only a relatively small number of them are required or prerequisites, as we call them in the LEED rating system. Under the Living Building Challenge, we use the term imperatives. There are no, this is optionals. We have to meet the requirements of all of the imperatives to meet the levels of certification that Brad alluded to. So for instance, for core building certification, we have to meet all 10 of those little green circle imperatives. For full Living Building Challenge, we have to meet all 20 imperatives. So it's a substantially higher level of performance and commitment by the project team than you see in LEED. I'm a LEED fellow. That's the highest accreditation that the Green Building Certification Institute gives. So if you cut me, I'd be LEED green, but Living Building Challenge is really the benchmark for our industry for the highest level of environmental performance.
Thanks, Kim. And one way we've been framing it is LBC is maybe equivalent to LEED Platinum plus. But another important thing to remember is LBC wants you to win. They want you to succeed. So this baked in flexibility with scale jumping and hand printing is crucial. And there are also exceptions to several of the imperatives, which are equally difficult, but there is that flexibility built into the framework. Another thing I'd like to point out, just achieving the imperatives on paper is half the battle. Once the project is completed, there's a 12-month scoring period where you basically get the building up and running, you collect data, and at the end of that 12-month period, you're scored on your data. So IFI comes in and they make sure that your building is doing what it was designed to do. Kim, could you talk real quick about Just? I know it's a transparency initiative, but I think it's super cool. Manuel Zeitlin Architects is Just, we have a Just label, and I believe TLC and Hawkins Partners do too.
That's right, Brad. The Just label is essentially, and Brad alluded to it in the earlier slide, a transparency certification where a business shares its social justice and diversity performance metrics with the world and makes it available for people to see and understand how your firm does in any number of social justice indicators, things like ethnic diversity, as well as gender diversity of your workforce, your commitment to paying a living wage to your staff, the restriction on the ratio between the highest paid person in your organization and the lowest paid person in your organization. It looks to see how you contribute to your community and to influence your supply chain to not only improve your own social justice and diversity performance, but have influence on the people you do business with and the community that you live in. And one of the imperatives in the Living Building Challenge, there's an equity pedal. At least one member of your project team must be Just labeled, and the project does an outreach to at least 10 other firms to encourage them to go through the same, at least a self-assessment using the Just framework to see how they're doing with social justice. And as with all of the Living Future products, this is a performance-based label. You don't just say that you do it, you demonstrate your performance, and then after a limited time, you have to renew that to demonstrate your ongoing commitment to these transparency and social justice movements.
Great. Thank you, Kim. Next slide, please. We're going to show you a couple precedents. We have 3 examples of LBC and sustainable projects. Next slide. The first project is the Candida building in Atlanta, Georgia, and it is on Georgia Tech's campus. It's a beautiful building. I urge anybody that is in Atlanta to swing by and visit. They have a website that is chock full of really cool information. There's a 3D tour of the building. There's really great videos of the project, really cool stats of all the building systems. Super successful building, and I believe it is at the end of its 12-month scoring period, so we should be getting.
It is certified.
It is certified, great.
Yep.
So it is the first full LBC project in the Southeast. So that's a huge deal. The next slide is a smaller scale on the other side of the country. This is in Washington State, and it's a private residence, so much smaller scale, totally different part of the world. Some of the cool features of this project, it used structural rammed earth walls. There is no gypboard, no drywall in the project at all. It has a 100% closed loop rainwater system. It uses PV power and was the first project in its community to use composting toilets. And the important thing to note here is that sometimes LBC projects require a lot of pushing to get things approved. And this this project did that for this community. It was the first foot in the door for composting toilets. And now everybody on this particular island is allowed to also use composting toilets. So setting a precedent is equally important to this framework. The next project is on the opposite side of the globe. This is in Singapore, the University of Singapore. And I just wanted to show this project because LBC and Living Future is a global initiative. This project is not LBC certified, it is Zero Energy certified. And that is another program under the Living Future umbrella. And Zero Energy requires 100% of the building's energy to be produced on site. So another really great initiative to go after. With that, I'd like to open it up to questions if anybody has any.
Oh, I was muted. So we did get, it looks like 2 questions here. This first one comes from Beth Z. It's beyond those represented on the panel. How do you recommend finding designers and architects that are LBC certified?
And just a nomenclature thing, only projects are certified. There is an accreditation program called Living Future Accredited, LFA, for getting into and finding other professionals that have experience with living building challenge projects. The ILFI, the living-future.org website maintains a current list of all the LBC certified projects, both full LBC as well as pedal certification, and provides a little case study information on each of those projects. And under those little descriptions, you will find the names of the architecture firms and engineering firms, as well as construction firms that were involved on the project. So you can actually look to see who's been working on those projects. I will tell you that locally, it's an extremely small community. There are very few, as Brad said, completed living building challenge projects in the world, with the Candida building being the first one here in the Southeast. So finding design professionals and construction professionals who have actually been through the entire living building challenge project certification period is a relatively small community.
All right, thank you, Kim. And Jen dropped that link into the chat. We had 2 more questions come in. This one's from Pam. Size of homes have increased as family size has decreased. Do you address residential home footprints to save on building materials?
The way the Living Building Challenge certification process works, you are basically encouraged to minimize the amount of material that you use on a project. And we can get into this in a little bit more detail, but a lot of that has to do with what's called embodied carbon, or the carbon emissions that are associated with manufacturing, transporting, and building the building itself. And the more material that you put into a building, the greater embodied carbon debt that you incur. And the Living Building Challenge certification requires that you offset that entire embodied carbon footprint, either by carbon sequestration or additional renewable energy generation. You have to do something in your project that negates all of that embodied carbon. So if you build a really big building for just a few people, you're going to incur an extremely large carbon debt that you have to work off or pay off in order to achieve this certification. On the other hand, LEED for Homes actually has points assigned to it that give you more points for the less square footage that you have per building occupant. So LEED approaches it one way, Living Building Challenge another way.
Great point there, Kim. And kind of you just hit
Patrick,
off on the oh,
Yeah, I'm sorry, I was going to jump in real quick on that
Okay.
too. A couple of things we, sort of found during the design process for the concrete association is that just the cost of construction today, we went through several redesigns to reduce the size of the building itself and went from, I think around 5,000 square feet to maybe a little over 3,000 square feet. I'm not sure exactly, but sort of what this process does, it gives you the chance to get to what's really essential in a home or a building, what's really important and what matters and what can you do without. The other thing we discovered that I really like is a sort of a approach to thinking about is there a way to limit your palette of materials that you use to design and build with? So instead of having, Brad just mentioned how there was no drywall in the home out west, that instead of just having every material that we typically are used to using, can you narrow your palette to a range of materials that are totally sustainable, that don't have harmful chemicals in them, that are produced locally, ideally, so you reduce transportation costs. And I think that's a really interesting approach that I know we're trying to apply as a firm, but it just seems like a great approach for all designers to think about.
Yeah. Manuel, thank you for that. Kim, thank you for that as well. And this next one is a note that you already have touched on, but this one comes from Susan. How can we apply this to a home, especially one built in 1962?
Well, Brad alluded to this earlier. We really need to change the way our paradigm of looking at design and construction to giving much more emphasis to existing buildings, to the adaptive reuse and the renovation of existing buildings. And in this particular example of a home built in 1962, because it's an existing home, you're not going to be taking additional materials, a lot of existing materials to build the structure of this home. The embodied carbon of that project is very small. We don't penalize you for having to go back and figure out the embodied carbon of an existing building that's already built that you're renovating and reusing. You get to take credit for all of that against your embodied carbon debt. So we really, really do encourage you to look for opportunities to bring new lives to existing buildings.
Great point there, Kim. This one's from Michelle. Other than the Candida building, do we have any other examples of LBC or pedal certified buildings relatively close by? I know the Candida building is the only one in the southeast, but are there more in the continental United States?
I believe we're up to about 50 Living Building Challenge projects, full Living Building Challenge projects, probably another 100 pedal certified projects. About 3/4 of those are in the continental United States. There's a handful in Australia and New Zealand. There's a number up in Canada, but almost all of that 3/4 are in the continental United States. Of those, roughly 100 to maybe slightly over 100 certified full living building and pedal certified projects, way more than half of them are within 100 miles of the Pacific Ocean. And then the rest of them are just scattered around the United States. I would say the next closest ones to us here in Nashville are going to be up in Indiana and over in Missouri.
Okay. And we have time for just one more question here, but please do keep those questions coming because we have another Q&A session after our next presentation. But this one comes from Eric. LEED, LBC, and other certifications seem to be more popular amongst commercial buildings compared to residential homes, especially in the Southeast. what do you see as the primary obstacle to increasing the acceptance of these certifications in the residential sector? And Kim, I know you already alluded to kind of like a paradigm shift, but maybe we can just dig into that a little bit more.
I think the biggest thing would be less knuckle-headed home builders. That's the pinch point in the residential marketplace, are the home builders. And as a group, the ones here in the Southeast and Middle Tennessee tend to be snuff dipping, pickup driving rednecks who think, well, I can't put none of that there in one of my houses because I ain't never done that before. And there's a certain amount of truth to that. There are technologies and approaches in these homes that are not business as usual. And unfortunately, in the construction business, you make the most money if you get to do the same thing that you've always done over and over and over again. If you do something new, then you have to factor in the learning cost of that. And the home building community in Middle Tennessee is just not open-minded enough to adopt new design and construction practices. There's some exceptions. There are some really good builders in the Middle Tennessee area, but they are small in comparison to the number of knuckleheads.
Can I piggyback on that just real quick? We built a house several years ago, and it was going towards a LEED certification. And at the tail end of that, we tackled or tried to tackle that very thing, and just showing how, as a community, you know, if your cost of construction go up a little bit more, but then your delta and what your savings are, if your focus is on energy savings, this is what you're saving long term. So I think some of that comes from changing the mind shift in the market, because when the market starts demanding certain aspects to it, then the contractors would hopefully follow. So I think that it's not just the home building industry, it's also, you know, just the general public and educating.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right. Well, to our panelists, thank you so much for that. And Jen, I'm going to toss it back over to you because I think we're ready for the second portion of today's session.
Sounds good. I think we are ready to jump into the Tennessee Concrete Association project. So I will turn it back over to our panelists to go over that. I will just remind everybody, keep your questions coming. We will have more time for questions until 1:30 today. So keep them coming in the chat.
All right, thanks, Jen. Thanks, Patrick. I'd like to hand it over to Alan now to introduce the Tennessee Concrete Association. I have just a couple of questions for Alan. Why did you want to pursue LBC, and why is sustainability important to you and the concrete industry?
Thanks, Brad. And I think for, you know, there's a variety of reasons, not maybe a single reason. Certainly some of those reasons are pragmatic as we, you know, building materials compete with each other in the marketplace. And my day job, as I like to say, is to educate folks on the many benefits of concrete as a building material. So, you know, that's one of the pragmatic reasons. Personally, I wanted to show that we could, you know, take what most would agree is the toughest sustainable construction certification system in the world, the Living Building Challenge, and build a building that's essentially 100% concrete and meet that challenge. I think that, to me, that's a powerful statement. And all the things that have been said, what Kim was mentioning with incurring, you know, measuring your embodied carbon, all those things, concrete can certainly do that. And, you know, as I learned more about the LBC, I really love the fact, kind of the philosophy behind the whole thing, which is that whatever you do, your project should improve your local community. And that really resonated with me personally. I think that's a great principle to apply, not just to building, but to life. You know, wherever you are, you should make things better, not worse. So I think those are probably the two most powerful things, kind of the business case, because we do represent business owners for our product, and then the philosophical case to really try to make our community better.
Great, thank you. Next slide. So we'll just jump into the project. These are some model shots. Some things to note here, we utilized a really simple roof form to maximize our solar gain for our PV array. You can see in the lower right corner. That PV system provides 105% of the building's energy needs on an annual basis and includes storage batteries as a resiliency measure. It may be difficult to see in this slide, but we'll get to it in the next. The project features 2 rainwater cisterns that collect all of the roof water, and the intent there is to reuse that water for irrigation. We have provided shade structures and large roof overhangs to reduce heat gain and provide covered outdoor space. Next slide, please. And so on the image on the left, this is where we started, and this goes back to the idea of right sizing the building versus budget. And on the right side of the slide, this is where we ended up. And the main difference here is the left side of the building. You can see we reduced that square footage considerably. As Manuel said, we cut out about 1,500 square feet and really just landed on what we needed for the program. Another thing to note here are the 2 cisterns out front. And then the shade structure also at the front of the building. Next slide, please. So again, the left image is the front of the building. The right image is the back of the building. Some things to note here, the shade structure at the front of the building utilizes salvage wood that we pulled from TCA's previous home. So that trellis structure existed at the previous campus. Alan dismantled that and has it stored, and we will use that again here on this site to shade those windows and that space inside, and also to help tell the story of the evolution of the company. On the back side of the building, you can see clear story windows as well as tall vertical windows. Every space in the project has access to natural light and natural ventilation, and those operable windows have been set up in the building in a way that will promote cross breezes. Another thing to note here on this slide is our wall types. So again, on the left side, the front of the building, we utilize, as Alan said, all concrete walls. We have 3 wall types, and if you want to count the very limited metal stud walls that we have 4 wall types total. So in the front of the building, that mostly solid wall you see there is called an ICF 1 series wall. And ICF stands for insulated concrete form. And what that is a module wall system that comes to the site flat. You unfold it, and the form is the insulation. You stack that up, pour concrete into the core, and you're ready to go. That formwork has furring strips built into the forms. So as soon as the concrete cures, you're ready to attach drywall to the interior and whatever exterior finish to the exterior. Now, the difference with the 1 series wall is it's obviously one-sided. So that is one of our feature walls, and the exterior portion of that wall will be exposed concrete. At the back of the building, we featured a thermomass wall type, which is exactly opposite. It's a concrete sandwich with an insulation core, an insulated core. And that those walls were used for our lab space and our classroom. So on the interior of those spaces, you will have exposed concrete. Next slide, please. Again, this is just kind of building systems overview. You can see our solar array on the roof. the reclaimed wood or the salvage wood shading trellis at the front of the building, the rainwater cisterns on the right, excuse me, on the left image, you can see the roof overhang that shades the office windows. And then I think we're going to go to some interior views next. This is the classroom space, early afternoon and evening. So you can see light creeping in a really well lit classroom space during the day. You can also see those operable windows. Next slide. This is the workroom space where certification manuals are put together and certifications are printed, and basically all the paperwork for all of the classes and educational resources. It's all done here. This is the space that gets shaded by the reclaimed wood trellis. And you can see again here an early morning and evening shot. Next slide. So this is our reception space. This was the space that was reduced the most when we started right sizing the square footage. Originally, we had planned for this space to include a large area for conferences and community gatherings. But once we started to really drill down on the program, we realized that this amount of square footage is ample and works really nicely for the building and its inhabitants. And just to let you know, including Alan, I believe there's only 3 more employees. So it's a very small operation, which also helped us to right size the building. Next slide. And then this is a shot looking north. This is Alan's office. And again, morning and evening shot. So you can see the operability of his window wall and just the nice quality of light that he would get in that space. Next slide, please. And then I just wanted to share some of our specs to show you that LBC projects may or may not look different from typical project specs. This first slide is probably the most unique. And I'll let Alan speak to this a little bit, but basically what we did was we added carbon cure to our concrete, and we talked with our structural engineer about adding this. And since then, I believe this has become a common practice for his office. And I'll let Alan speak to what carbon cure is and does and all the cool stuff around it.
Sure. There's a number of things that can be done to significantly reduce the embodied carbon in a cubic yard of concrete. And that's actually one of the reasons that we wanted to build this building with 100% concrete. I would encourage anybody that's looking at building, there is an incredible amount of information out there about embodied carbon and building materials. There's also an incredible amount of misinformation. So you should take what I'm saying with a grain of salt, and you should certainly apply that same rationale to any other building material. But I think the science, the data is strongly in our favor that concrete is probably the lowest embodied carbon building material that you can use over the long term. And one of the other things that I really like about Living Building Challenge and LEED is that they shifted the conversation for building all types of structures from what's the cheapest to what we generally refer to as life cycle. And what's the cheapest depends greatly on the length of your evaluation period. So if your evaluation period is 1 week, then that's a different answer than 30 or 40 or 50 years or 100 years, which we can build concrete buildings that will easily last 100 years. And there's a number of those that prove that point in Nashville. So those are important mindsets. And Laura alluded to that when it comes to building it's owners have to shift their mindsets. So what Brad's referring to here is injecting carbon dioxide into fresh concrete mixes. And I won't bore you with the chemistry, but I will say that it works. It's been proven. There are now, I think, tens of millions of cubic yards of concrete that have been placed with this technology, and it's fairly routine here in Middle Tennessee. And it allows us to maintain performance properties and reduce the amount of Portland cement required to produce those properties. So it's a pretty simple, easy win, and it will reduce the embodied carbon of a concrete mix by about 5% just off the top. There are other things we can do that reduce it actually a lot more, but this is an easy win, and it's becoming much more popular.
And it's available in our market, correct?
That's correct.
All right, thank you, Alan. Next slide. Again, these are just specs and a little nitty gritty, but I wanted to highlight that we are using Conair storefronts. We're using Certainty JIP, USG JIP products, all very normal products. The only difference, these products are declared. They meet the requirements of LBC. So within a normal spec, you may see these exact products and not realize you're actually using a super green material. Next slide. And again, in some instances, such as this TPO spec, GAF has declared their entire product line. Everything they offer meets LBC. I think they rebuilt or renovated their factories, so they have green facilities, and that's all in the spirit of LBC, pushing our manufacturers, pushing the industry to do better and to set a precedent. Next slide, please. And I think that's it. I just wanted to go over some project challenges and wins. So I'll start with the challenges. The water pedal is probably the hardest pedal to achieve, and we have run into that with this project. Our septic design has been hung up for several months now. Very challenging. Laura, could you maybe speak to some of the alternate solutions that we've looked into in research, such as lagoons or living machines, just to give everybody an idea of the breadth of alternate solutions out there? You're muted.
Sorry, I was muted. I was like, anyway, sure. So on this particular project or this parcel, to give a framework of where it sits, it's in the Adiac community, and it is beautiful rural landscape all around it. And so a lot of what we're after is to try to emulate that vernacular on this site, which a lot of it's already there. It's just emphasizing and augmenting to get it back to the more natural vernacular. So when we learned that we were not going to be able to use the existing septic system, we started looking at other alternatives and what could those be. So there was mention about the composting toilets was one. There is an Advantex, it's a kind of a variation of a septic system. So that was another option. And then lagoons was another option. So all viable, all with their own challenges. With the lagoon system that we learned, we had to have 5 acres of property. We have 4.99 acres of property, but there was a way to potentially make that work. But then just understanding the lagoons, obviously the aesthetics, not terribly great. And so for a lot of different reasons, we ended up not going in that direction. So we are now pursuing the idea of a composting toilet or the Advantex system, and just trying to work that through with code. So there's challenges with it. And if there's ever any interest in reading through some of the case studies on the IFLI website, they go through, there's many of them that have used the composting toilet systems, and there's several of them that use the Advantex system. And in their notes, a lot of them talk about the challenges and just trying to work through with the different municipalities on how to make that agreeable or not. And we're in that same pattern right now. So still working on that one.
Yep. Thank you, Laura.
Mhm.
Jen, do we want to pause for a
Yeah,
moment?
we are just gonna pause really quick. We're gonna hop back into it, but I know that a number of you are here for just the lunch hour. And so before we let you folks go, we want everyone that can stay, because we've got lots more questions, some really amazing questions to go over. But I do just want to share really quickly that our next session is going to be on May 26th. It's going to be on home energy efficiency. So we've got a whole new presentation for you. A lot of things you can do at your own home to make it more energy efficient. So be sure to register for that coming up. Don't forget to follow us, stay connected. And as Patrick mentioned at the beginning of today's episode, we are going to have a follow-up email with a link to today's recording. So if you do have to hop off now, we understand, but we're going to have the video for you to watch all of these additional comments and thoughts and discussion about this project. And I also, most importantly, want to thank all of our panelists at this time for being here, for providing this information, this presentation for Sustainable in the City Thinking Upstream today. Is there anything else I missed for our 1 o'clock announcement, Patrick? Or are we ready to jump back in?
I think you covered it. I think we're ready to jump back in. We have a bunch of questions that have come up since our last Q&A. If you have any questions, keep them coming. And with that, Jen, let's get right on to it. So this is from our last round of Q&A. So if we can just put on our living buildings hat one more time. Would earthship houses likely meet LBC guidelines, only they haven't gone through the official process?
Is that a Kim question? I'm not personally familiar with the earthship houses.
And if you are still in the group and you posited that question, please just maybe shoot us a link as to what an earthship house might be. And while we wait, let's move on to
Patrick,
our next.
Just one comment about that. I think one of the things, that if you read through the list of imperatives or the petals, we haven't talked about a lot, but the idea that the living building certification is not just about the building itself, but about the impact on community, about, developing, for example, community gardens or things off site that could be used by the community. The idea of doing, getting involved in the community with education initiatives, with doing social justice initiatives. So I think that's really one of the fascinating things. And Alan mentioned that's one of the reasons he wanted to do this certification to start with, because of the potential impact on the community. So it's a much broader mindset, that idea of being regenerative. It's about not just giving more back to the site and to the environment, but also giving back to the community and the residents in the community.
Yeah, thank you for that, Manuel. And Kim, did you have something?
I did a little Googling on what earthship is. So
and you accidentally muted yourself.
An earthship is a type of passive solar house made of both natural and upcycled materials, such as earth-packed tires. Earthships can be completely off-grid or partially off-grid. So it sounds like that the thought process of being net zero energy, as well as using materials that are upcycled instead of ending up in a landfill. They've actually been salvaged and reused for useful purpose. It sounds like a number of the precepts associated with earthship would fit in well with the Living Building Challenge. But as we were just discussing, there are a lot of other things with the Living Building Challenge that go sort of beyond the simple architecture and material selection of the building. The little brief blurb that I read about earthship did not tell me about how the water cycle was being handled. And that's, as we were just saying, the water petal is probably the most difficult technical challenge of bringing in an LBC project.
All right, Kim, thank you for that. Our next question here is, what is the general state of incentives for these types of builds or retrofits in terms of power company credits or tax incentives, like the Energy Right program that NES used to offer for homes?
Unfortunately, in our region, there is a real shortage of these sorts of incentives. About the only one that I know of that is of any significance whatsoever is the investment tax credit associated with solar electric systems, so that you can take 30% of the value of the PV system that's installed before the end of 2022 and take that as a credit against your taxes. However, when you're a nonprofit organization like the Tennessee Concrete Association, that really doesn't help you very much.
Kim, are there still tax credits for geothermal also?
There are some tax credits for many of the things that the Energy Right system was set up for, like home insulation or increased envelope insulation, geothermal systems, but they're not nearly as large as the PV ITC.
All right, thank you for that. So our next question here is about demolition. So how does this approach apply to all the demolition that Nashville allows developers to do? Should the city establish codes to discourage all this demolition to build cheaply built tall and skinnies, for example?
Jen, you ought to take that one.
Yeah, this is more of a solid waste question, so I'm gonna toss this one to my co-host, Jen Harmon.
Let me look back over this question. How do apply demolition allows development? This is a really excellent question. And I think some of this was also answered a little bit in our last, I believe in our last presentation to talk about these things. I mean, ultimately, Nashville does have a zero waste master plan that addresses construction and demolition waste. We have started working on that. About 23% of our waste stream is construction and demolition waste. And so part of that is to provide mandates that require recycling, that require, for example, deconstruction for demolition projects is something that's included in the zero waste master plan long-term. So there's a lot of stuff that's in the zero waste master plan to address some of this stuff, but it's also just kind of the beginning. And, you know, I don't know if I have an exact answer beyond that at this time, but there's definitely a lot that's in there that we're looking at to look at how we can mandate. But one thing to also note is that anytime we're looking to mandate something here in Nashville, we have to look first at the state. For example, we want to mandate recycling C&D material and make that just required to do on a demolition or construction site. But it takes baby steps to get there because there's we also have to understand where the state's priorities are and how those state priorities might impact what we're trying to do here locally in Nashville. A great example of this would be the ban on plastic bag bans. So we really have to work very carefully, and we also have to work with our local politicians as well, our elected officials. I will say our elected officials, there's a lot of positive, I've spoken with a lot of council members that are really pushing for us to move forward on construction, demolition, waste reduction. So I see a lot of positivity there, but there's some challenges ahead, and it's going to take some time to get there, but it's definitely something that we're exploring. So
and one of the things you're doing right is requiring a construction waste management plan with every commercial permit moving forward.
Yes, we just last month, council had approved some legislation that's going to allow us to actually start requiring or gathering reporting information from large commercial projects on what waste they're generating how much they're generating, and what are they doing with that waste. So that's not necessarily to say that they're required to recycle it, but it is an education opportunity. So we can start building some of the infrastructure that's needed to require recycling in the future, both from just a reporting and logistics standpoint, from staffing here at Public Works, or at Metro rather, as well as kind of encouraging some of that industry to develop as well in terms of that material.
So,
There's
so if you have-
also,
oh, go ahead.
there's also a role for us as consumers to play. And one of the keys to recycling is to make sure that there is value in what you recycle. And if we as consumers were more aggressive about asking that we have materials made available to us, especially in the construction industry, that are salvaged and reused, then that would be an economic incentive. It would not just simply be the stick of regulations. It would be the carrot of an economic benefit of incorporating those materials into future construction projects. And I know that there's a small group of dedicated individuals here in the Middle Tennessee community that are working on that very thing of creating resources of salvaged building materials for use in future building projects.
And Kim, to kind of harken back to the Living Building Challenge, there is some, there are incentives in that to use recycled materials. In fact, I think you have to use 2 or 3, I can't remember the details, but Living Building Challenge does address that. And then when you do demolition, you have to divert at least, I believe, 90% from the landfill to under Living Building Challenge. So it does address that. And we had to demolish an old house out there. I'm not always a fan of taking what's existing and trying to make it work, because a lot of the homes that were built many years ago were built to codes that were not nearly, particularly with energy, not nearly as good as what we have today. And you can spend, from an owner's perspective, a lot of money trying to bring them up to modern performance standards, when really you get to where you want to be performance-wise much easier with a clean slate. So it's not as simple as we sometimes want to make it, particularly when you as the owner are funding that. So I would just encourage people to take that into consideration. But LBC does address that, and there are incentives built in.
All right, thank you for that one, Alan and Kim and Manuel. This next question that we have here comes from a friend of Sustainable in the City, Katie Poss. It is what type of insulation is being used in the ICF walls? Is it free of red list chemicals?
I'll take that one, Patrick. That's a great question, Katie. The ICF system that we selected for our project actually has a declare label. So it is free of, and it is free of red list materials. Most of the insulating concrete forms are made from expanded polystyrene, very common building material, but that's a very astute question. And hopefully I've answered it.
All right, and this next one actually comes from Manuel. It's since concrete often gets a bad rap for being carbon insensitive, how is this project addressing that?
I guess that one falls to me as well as to the design team. But when it comes to the actual concrete, we will be using some concrete that is engineered, designed to have the lowest embodied carbon possible. And just very high level, we can do things at almost any concrete batch plant today to reduce the embodied carbon of that mix by 50%. Just kind of, those are choices you can make easily, and you don't have to do anything special. There's always considerations when you make changes to materials, but those are pretty straightforward. So we'll be utilizing some of those, and as well as things like carbon cure that we mentioned earlier, to try to ratchet the embodied carbon in the mixes as low as possible.
getting back to something a couple of people mentioned, I think Brad talked about, the impact on the industry. One of the great things I think that LEED achieved, when LEED first came out, it required that you had to get materials that were made within 500 miles of the project. And, and a lot of materials were made overseas, but, didn't meet other requirements. Whereas now, like every carpet, every piece of ceiling material, every piece of drywall are all manufactured to meet LEED requirements. A lot of international manufacturers have opened plants, especially in the Southeast, because you're close to a large part of the population. So, looking at the carbon cure process, I think there's one ready mix manufacturer in the Nashville area that actually does the carbon cure process. But Brad mentioned that our engineer is now calling for it and all their specifications maybe. So, if we can get other architects and engineering firms to call for carbon cure or a similar process that reduces encapsulated carbon, then that'll just be a change. Then Smyrna Ready Mix and all the other ready mix companies will just do it as part of the normal way of doing things. So, that's again one of the big benefits of these types of certification programs is that they actually they make what was kind of maybe an extreme approach to things become just the norm. Kim responded to an email earlier today that we were having amongst ourselves, about, and Kim, you may want to, jump in here, but just the idea that, we've been talking about sustainability and doing sustainability certification programs for probably 20 years now. But, what Brad started out at the very beginning saying that we're hitting a tipping point if we haven't already passed it. And little baby steps, is something we really don't have time for anymore. We have to do major commitments on everybody's part to really save the planet, to save life on the planet. That we're this is serious stuff that we're talking about.
Absolutely.
Kim, did I phrase that?
All right, moving on to our next question here. Great points, Manuel. What is the average difference in SF cost between the traditional building type and the living building challenge?
That sounds like an owner's question to some extent when you start talking about cost, that owners always care about cost. And that's a shifting picture. Costs in Nashville are getting more expensive, and there's always so many things that impact that, so many choices. So it's very difficult to compare, building system A versus B versus C because there's a host of other trade-offs. But what we're seeing right now, and this was not necessarily the case when we started our design process, but because it's no secret, lumber has escalated dramatically. It's at record levels that nobody's ever seen. You can actually build concrete homes and offices today less expensive than you can with lumber. And that's pretty well documented because lumber has escalated so dramatically. So the square foot cost, a better example might be our friends to the north in Kentucky. There's a school system up there. And in fact, we just did a tour there last week, but they've been building insulating concrete formed schools up there for close to 15 years. They've been building them for less than the comparable schools, and on average, they're saving $150,000 a year on their energy budget by building very energy efficient, and they're using insulating concrete forms as the primary way they do that. So they're building for less than traditional schools cost per square foot. They're building wonderful schools, and they're saving 75% of their energy bill. So, I get a little frustrated with the cost question because we generally focus on first cost, and that's the wrong place to focus. But concrete wall systems right now, particularly ICFs, very competitive. Throw out a X amount per square foot would not be responsible because too many things go into that to make for an easy comparison.
The comparison to make is not an LBC project against a project that is just built to the minimum standard possible. What you have to do is you have to compare similar quality. So there's a speculative office building in Seattle, the Bullitt Center, that was conceived as an LBC project, but it's a speculative office building. So it had to be competitive in that market in order to lease space to make the return on investment work out. And that developer said, I can't spend money needlessly just to get to LBC. I have to make the business case work. And he made the business case work. He charges higher than base market rates. He gets a Class A rate for his rent, but because his operating costs are so low and he's able to get a good rent rate for his project, he is hiring armored trucks to take his money to the bank. So this cost per square foot, as Alan said, a first cost number is not what you want to look at. You want to look at the entire business case for the building.
And Brad, did you have anything you wanted to add there?
Yep, I think it's a super question, and I've actually been drilling down on that very question for our office, and I have just a couple of stats here to share with regard to mechanical and plumbing numbers. So an LBC, and this is based on our project, LBC price for mechanical is 54.73 a square foot. Standard pricing for the same product would be $35.83. The plumbing number is for LBC is 38.49, and the standard price is 34.1 a square foot. So there is an increase, but it's slight. And as Kim just said, this is first cost. You're gonna see some money back on your mechanical systems for sure.
All great points. And this next one is about the IFC project, and it comes from Keith Lisu. Will the project produce potable water? It's a great question.
So what we ended up doing on the water, and I think while we were certainly having our challenges with sewage in terms of, recapturing water and all that, that's relatively easy to do because of the amount of rainfall we get here. So we are not planning to connect to municipal water. We have a well, so we drilled a well. It's about 170 foot deep. That's what we're going to use for both potable supply. We'll have to do a little bit of treatment, but not much. It was pretty good water. We are not going to treat the recaptured rainwater to potable levels because we don't have to. Using the well water allows us to meet the LBC requirements, but it would not be very difficult if we had chosen to treat the captured rainwater to make it potable. But we are not going to do that on this project.
That's a really important sort of design consideration. It is amazing what we as a society do with drinking quality water. The amount of money that we put into making water drinking quality, and then the non-drinking things that we do with it are astounding. So what we do in high performance projects is we separate the potable uses from the non-potable uses. And we don't use drinking water to flush toilets, for instance, or to water plants, or to wash down our driveway. We don't go through the incredible expense and complication of doing that. We restrict drinking water to human consumption purposes.
Great point there, Kim. And this last question, this might not be the last question, but I'm going to posit it to everyone. It's a bit of a fun one. It comes from Zoe. It's, are there any up and coming materials with sustainability attributes? Cross-laminated timber, maybe. Aside from carbon, what else do you look for in materials? I'm going to put that on everybody.
Well, it's a loaded question in some ways. What I would say is that all building materials have impacts, period. Every building material you choose has impacts, and all building materials have different characteristics. So part of that question is, what do you want out of your building? I think in the carbon debate, as I alluded to earlier, there's been a lot of misinformation. And I think a lot of those chickens are coming home to roost right now as we dig in. I think that's a good thing. It's more transparent. When you look at things like biogenic carbon as related to wood products, what you find out is there was a gaping hole in how, and some carbon not being accounted for. And it's really a mistake on any project to make a decision about materials based on just one single attribute. So that's the mistake I sometimes see now, is that everybody runs to the embodied carbon numbers, and you can't really compare one building material to another on the basis of one dimension because so many other things enter into that. So that's an important question. There's more resources available today, certainly, than there were years ago to help people make informed decisions, but there's not a simple answer, and it will vary by project.
Back in the day, there was the conversation about the cradle to cradle, where it goes from the harvesting the raw materials all the way through to the use and then to the recyclability of that product, or how you can reuse it, repurpose it. So I think those conversations are still out there. And I think that, like having like the declare labels and everything else in the red list really helps to narrow that. And again, going back to the market starting to ask and demand, then that product becomes available and easier to find, and the costs come down. So again, it just goes back to education and awareness that what we're asking for, that the thing that we buy at the store, that's not just, the use of it or what that material is. And it's the whole gamut. And how do we think about that?
And following up on that, and since Laura was speaking, use of native plant materials is another huge thing, that plants that are, that fit our environment and our ecosystem as compared to using exotic plants, they're set to use the right amount of water and soil that are.
And edible landscapes, put food out in your yard.
Yeah. But I want to go back to what I was saying earlier about like narrowing our palette. A couple examples of that, our materials palette. I think that's a huge way to address that. So for example, Crossville Ceramics, plant is in Crossville, Tennessee, and they certainly have plenty of sustainable materials that they're in their manufacturing processes. So why wouldn't we just say, okay, all our ceramic tile we use in our projects is going to be from Crossville Ceramics, as compared to ceramics that may be made in Texas or Kansas or somewhere in the Northwest. Same, Betsy, to use an initial, I think she's representing a hemp product now that's made in Kentucky. Similar products are made in Canada. So again, you could easily say, okay, we're going to get all of our materials that are possible from within one state's distance. Not, there might be a beautiful, I know with LEED, Kim, one of the problems earlier on with LEED was that FSC forest certified products were only available, I think, from the Northwest, and there were equally sustainable forests in Alabama, but because of the certification, they weren't FSC certified yet. People were having to ship lumber from the Northwest to Tennessee compared to going, 50 miles and getting, or 100 miles and getting it from Alabama. So I think that distance and the idea of the local is just such a huge part of this whole way of thinking.
I'm going to once again talk about what we as consumers can do to influence what our choices are. And this whole transparency movement is one of the things that can move the marketplace. And under the Living Building Challenge, we have what are called the declare labels, which are essentially like you get on the side of a box of animal crackers. How much refined flour, how much sugar, how much fat, how many grams of fiber, how many calories altogether, how much is in protein. You, as an informed consumer, are now starting to read those things when you make food choices for your family. We need that same level of transparency in building materials. And one of the things that that does is, if you are challenging the people who manufacture and provide materials for your home with declaring what's in that material, they'll stop putting bad stuff in there.
Mhm.
It will embarrass them into not putting the bad stuff in there. And there's the buzzword in our industry now is environmental product declarations, EPDs, and health product declaration labels, HPDs. And if we start insisting that we won't buy stuff that doesn't have that level of transparency, the industry will respond to that consumer pressure. And when that happens, we'll get better stuff. Now, for me, it's always carbon, because the existential threat to mammalian life on this planet is the fact that we're putting more fossilized carbon into the atmosphere than is getting taken out by biogenic processes. And that's causing the greenhouse effect and changing climate. And if we don't do something about paying attention to carbon first and always, then all these other discussions about what's got a red list or what's low VOC or any of that stuff is akin to having a discussion about how to arrange the deck chairs on the Titanic. We need to steer away from the iceberg first, then argue about the deck chairs.
Tim, wow, well said. I'm a little at a loss to words with how to follow that up. Just absolutely very well said. And also timely, because that brings us shortly after 1:30, which means we're going to conclude today's session of Sustainable in the City, Thinking Upstream. This has been Living Buildings. Again, please check your emails, most likely late this afternoon or tomorrow morning. And I will, have everything there for you all. And the Manuel's got the Green New Deal shirt, perfect. I'll have all the links mentioned there, a link to the YouTube channel, a link to today's session, a link to our next session. All of those things will be contained in that email. We do hope you join us in 2 weeks for our conversation on home energy efficiency. And Jen, is there anything else I might have forgotten?
I don't think so, but I am just, since we've been talking about construction and demolition, we do have another event coming up in June that's going to get into more about construction and demolition, for me, at least from the waste perspective, and also the habitat restore. So if you like today's section, I'm sure you're going to like that one as well. So do register for that one. And with that, thank you all so much. And thank you so much to our panelists. This has been so informative, so amazing. And we'll see everybody next time.
Yeah, until then, everybody take care, stay safe, and get some sun if you can.